The morning had started like any other on Earth, but it wasn't long before everything changed. Across the world, people were going about their daily routines, unaware of the terrible fate that was about to fall upon them. Cities bustled with life, cars honked in traffic, and children played in parks. But above them, in the sky, something was shifting. It began with a sudden, piercing sound, one that no one had ever heard before. It wasn't thunder, nor was it any natural disaster. The noise was unnatural, like the air itself was being torn apart. People stopped what they were doing, looking up, confused, frightened. The sound grew louder, and then came a deafening boom, shaking the ground beneath them. It wasn't just one boom, but many. All at once, massive explosions rocked major cities across the globe. New York, London, Beijing, each one was hit simultaneously. The explosions were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Entire buildings were reduced to rubble in seconds, with no warning, no time to escape. The sky seemed to crack open as if the earth itself was being split apart. Panic spread faster than the explosions. People screamed, running in all directions, desperate to find safety. But there was no safe place. No matter where they ran, the explosions followed, hitting each city with perfect timing, each one bringing more destruction than the last. The world's leaders scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The devastation was already overwhelming. In the heart of New York, Major Sarah Carter, a high-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Forces, stood frozen in shock as she watched the chaos unfold. She had never seen anything like this. The lights in the city flickered and went out as the explosions continued. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the acrid smell of burning metal. "Major, we need to move," shouted one of her subordinates, snapping her out of her daze. Sarah nodded quickly, her mind racing. Her first instinct was to help coordinate the defense. But there was no defense. The Earth's military forces were already being overrun by the mysterious attackers. They had no idea who these enemies were or where they had come from. But one thing was certain. They were far more powerful than anything Earth had ever faced. "Get everyone to the underground shelters," she ordered, her voice steady despite the panic around her. Now, her team moved quickly, ushering civilians toward safety as the explosions continued. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't afford to be afraid. She had to remain calm. There had to be something they could do. As they reached the shelter, the doors slammed shut behind them, sealing out the chaos. Inside, the air was thick with fear. People huddled together, some crying, others holding on to loved ones. Sarah could see the terror in their eyes. They were all asking the same question. What was happening? She didn't have an answer. The shelter's lights flickered, and the hum of the emergency generators filled the room. Sarah's hand shook as she clutched her communicator. She tried to contact command, but the signal was dead. Nothing worked. The attackers had jammed all communications, making it impossible to send or receive any messages. It was then that Sarah realized how hopeless the situation had become. The enemy was not only attacking, but also making sure that no help could arrive. Earth's military was powerless. As the hours passed, Sarah's mind raced. She knew she had to do something. But what? The enemy had already proven they could wipe out entire cities with ease. Whatever force was behind this attack, it was far beyond anything Earth could fight. And yet Sarah was a soldier. It was her duty to fight, to protect humanity no matter the odds. She stepped toward the shelter's command center, where a few of her team members were trying to make sense of the situation. Maps of the city flashed on the screen, showing areas that had been completely destroyed. She could barely recognize the streets she had once walked down. The map was covered in red, marking the path of destruction. "We need to find out who's behind this," Sarah said firmly. "We need to get out there, gather information, and start planning a counterattack." One of her officers, Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, shook his head. "We're not ready for a counterattack, Major. Our forces are scattered, communications down, and the enemy seems to be everywhere. I know, Sarah replied, a determined look in her eyes. But we can't sit here doing nothing. If we wait too long, it will be too late. Mark looked at her, torn between fear and duty. You're right, but we need a plan. We need to know what we're up against. I'll find out, Sarah said, her voice hardening with resolve. I'll lead a team. We'll make contact with the local resistance groups. We might be the last chance humanity has. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded. I'll help however I can. Good. Get what we need from the supply room. We'll leave at first light. As Sarah turned to gather her things, her thoughts raced. She had been trained to lead in situations like this, but nothing in her training had prepared her for an attack like this. These invaders, whoever they were, seemed unstoppable. She knew she had to be strong, for the people she had sworn to protect, for humanity. If there was even a chance to turn this around, she would find it. The shelter was quiet now, save for the soft murmur of voices. The survivors clung to the hope that someone would save them. But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. No one was coming. If Earth was going to survive, it would be because of the people still willing to fight. As the night wore on, Sarah and her team prepared to leave. She looked around at the frightened faces of the civilians, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. She wished there was more she could do for them, but all she could offer was the hope that they would be safe, at least for now. Just before dawn, Sarah and her team set out. The city was eerily silent. There was no sign of the enemy, but the destruction they had left behind was everywhere. Broken buildings, smoldering ruins, and abandoned cars littered the streets. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, and the ground was littered with debris. Stay alert, Sarah ordered as they moved forward. We don't know where the enemy is, but they're out there. The team moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. They knew they were walking into enemy territory, but they had no choice. Their mission was to find out what had caused this devastation, and, if possible, strike back. But every step they took only deepened the uncertainty. The enemy had been so precise, so ruthless. It felt like they were being hunted. As they moved through the ruins of the city, they suddenly heard the sound of distant footsteps. Sarah signaled for her team to stop, and they crouched low, waiting. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. A figure appeared in the distance, a man, his clothes ragged, his face covered in dirt. He looked around nervously, then spotted Sarah and her team. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky. Are you with them?" Sarah stepped forward cautiously. "We're not with anyone. We're trying to find out what happened. We need information. What do you know about the attack?" The man hesitated, then slowly nodded. "I've seen them. I don't know who they are, but they're not human. They came out of the sky, and his voice broke. "They just started destroying everything, like it was nothing. They have weapons that don't even make sense." The man's words sent a chill through Sarah. Non-human. Weapons that didn't make sense. It was the first clue they had, but the mystery only deepened. And the more they learned, the more they realized how little they understood about the force that had just brought Earth to its knees. As they continued their search for answers, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Humanity's fight for survival had only just begun, and they were up against something far worse than they could have ever imagined. This part sets the stage for the rest of the story, keeping the tension and mystery high while introducing the main characters in conflict. Let me know if you want any changes or additions. Days passed after the attack on Earth, but the world didn't seem to get any quieter. The explosions had stopped, but the damage was done. Cities lay in ruins, the skies were thick with smoke, and millions of people were missing or dead. It felt like the world had been turned upside down. Major Sarah Carter and her small team of survivors were now deep underground, hidden in an old military base. The shelter they had taken refuge in was cold and dark, and the only sounds were the hum of the generator and the distant, muffled noises of a world in chaos above them. No one had dared to leave the safety of the base, not yet. They needed time to plan, to figure out what to do next. But Sarah couldn't sit still. She knew that time was running out. Every hour they waited, the enemy grew stronger. She had seen the destruction with her own eyes, the terrifying power these invaders had. They had wiped out Earth's strongest cities without breaking a sweat. How was humanity supposed to fight back against something like that? "I've been looking at the reports," Lieutenant Mark Reynolds said, breaking the silence. "There's no sign of any military resistance left. They hit the major bases and wiped them clean. Whoever these people are, they knew exactly where to strike." Sarah stood up from the table where she had been reviewing maps. Her fingers traced the edges of the cities on the map, cities that were no longer there. "It's like they knew our every move," she said quietly. "Like they were one step ahead of us from the start." Mark nodded, his face grim. "That's what I'm afraid of." The others in the room were silent. The weight of their situation hung heavily in the air. Sarah knew she had to stay strong for them. But inside, she was struggling. They had no answers, no leads. They didn't even know who their enemies were. That was when a low, crackling voice came over the shelter's communication system. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. "This is Commander Evans. If anyone can hear this, we found something." The voice was weak, and the signal cut in and out, but Sarah felt a spark of hope. They weren't completely alone. Someone else was still fighting. Someone had information. "Commander Evans," Sarah said into the microphone, her heart racing. "This is Major Carter. Where are you?" There was a pause, and then the voice came back, stronger this time. "We're holed up in the ruins of the old military base near the coast. We've discovered something that might explain who the attackers are. But it's dangerous. We need backup. If you can hear this, please respond." The message ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at the static-filled screen. It was clear they were desperate, and whatever they had found, it was important. "We have to find them," Sarah said, her voice filled with urgency. "They might have answers. They might know who's behind this attack." Mark looked at her, concern in his eyes. "But it's dangerous out there, Major. We don't even know who we're up against." Sarah took a deep breath. She understood his hesitation. The world was in chaos, and they had no idea what kind of forces they were dealing with. But she couldn't wait any longer. Every second they spent hiding in the shadows was a second the enemy could use to destroy even more of Earth. They had to act. "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied. "If we want to survive, we need to learn more about these attackers. We need to find out who they are and what they want. And maybe, just maybe, we can stop them." The team spent the next few hours gathering supplies and preparing for the journey. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of what they might find. Could Commander Evans really have found something that would help them understand the enemy? Or was it just another dead end, another piece of false hope? As they left the shelter and emerged into the wasteland of the city, the destruction was overwhelming. The streets were eerily silent, the usual noise of city life replaced by the wind, and the occasional creak of a building on the verge of collapse. Sarah's boots crunched on the broken asphalt as they moved cautiously forward, keeping their eyes open for any signs of the enemy. It didn't take long before they encountered their first real danger. A group of what looked like scavengers appeared in the distance, their faces hidden behind makeshift masks. They moved quickly, and their eyes darted nervously as they spotted Sarah and her team. The group looked desperate, and Sarah could tell they were armed, though their weapons were nothing like the advanced technology the invaders had used. "Stay back," one of them shouted, pointing a crude gun at them. Sarah raised her hands in a peaceful gesture, signaling for her team to do the same. "We're not here to fight," she said calmly. "We're looking for information. We need to know what happened here. We need to know who attacked us." The scavengers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them stepped forward. "You don't want to know," he said, his voice shaky. "It's not just the invaders you should be worried about. There's something worse, something that was here before them. The man's words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Something worse. Who are they? She asked, her voice steady despite the growing fear inside her. What do you mean? The scavenger hesitated before answering, his eyes darting nervously around as if he feared someone might be listening. The invaders. They're not aliens. They're humans, or at least they were. They were exiled long ago. The truth is, they've been waiting for this moment. They'd been hiding, building their strength. They came back for revenge. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Humans. Exiled. It didn't make sense. How do you know this? She asked, her mind racing. The scavenger's face twisted in fear. I don't know all the details, but I've seen the symbols, the markings on their ships, on their weapons. They're human, just twisted, different. Sarah stood there, speechless. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but it didn't make sense. If these attackers were humans, what had happened to them? And why had they come back to destroy Earth? The journey to find the weapon had begun, and Major Sarah Carter could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. They were heading into unknown territory, a path that no one had traveled in centuries, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. If the invaders got to the weapon first, humanity's last hope would be gone. The group traveled in silence for hours, moving through the ruins of cities and across barren landscapes. The air was thick with dust, and the once bustling world had become a ghost of its former self. The silence was almost unbearable. Every step they took felt like they were getting closer to something unknown, something dangerous. Mark Reynolds walked beside Sarah, his face set with determination, but his eyes betrayed his worry. He had always been the practical one, always the first to question a plan. But now he seemed to trust Sarah completely. He knew she was their only chance. We'll get there, Sarah said, trying to reassure him. We have to. Mark nodded but didn't speak. He understood the stakes. They were heading into the heart of a forgotten civilization, a place that had been lost for centuries. No one knew what was waiting for them there, and every instinct told Sarah it wasn't going to be easy. It was dark when they finally reached the edge of the ancient city, the place where the weapon was supposed to be hidden. The ruins stretched out before them like a shadow, ancient stone buildings crumbling under the weight of time. But there was something more, a strange energy that hung in the air. It felt unnatural, almost as if the very earth itself was watching them. Sarah led the team through the ruined streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The buildings here were unlike anything they had seen before. Massive stone structures covered in carvings and symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. These were the markings from the map they had found in the military base. The same symbols that had been etched on the invaders' ships. As they moved deeper into the city, the atmosphere grew heavier. It was like walking through a forgotten dream, the past and present blending into one. The air smelled stale, but there was an underlying scent of something ancient and powerful. They reached the central square of the city, a place that seemed to be the heart of it all. In the center of the square stood a massive stone pillar, covered in the same strange symbols they had seen earlier. It was as if the pillar was calling to them, beckoning them closer. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The weapon is here." But before she could take another step, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A low rumble shook the air, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The ancient city was coming to life, or at least something was. "What's happening?" Mark asked, his voice filled with alarm. Sarah didn't have time to answer. She felt a surge of energy, like a shockwave passing through her body. It was as if the very stone beneath her feet was alive, responding to her presence. The symbols on the pillar began to glow brighter, their light intensifying until it was blinding. Then a voice boomed from somewhere deep within the ruins, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was an ancient language, one that Sarah didn't understand. But the meaning was clear. "You are not welcome here." The words were filled with power, and Sarah felt them in her bones. It was a warning, a command, telling them to turn back. But Sarah didn't move. She had come too far to stop now. "We're not leaving until we find the weapon," she said firmly, though her voice trembled with the weight of what they were about to face. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The pillar in front of them began to shift, its massive stones grinding against each other as if they were alive. The energy in the air grew stronger, and Sarah could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Something was coming. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, tall and imposing. It was humanoid, but its features were twisted, its body covered in strange metallic armor that glowed with the same eerie symbols. The figure moved toward them with an unnatural grace, its eyes glowing with a cold, unfeeling light. The invaders had found them. "No," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with fear and anger. "Stay back." But the figure didn't stop. It continued moving toward them, its presence suffocating. The team raised their weapons, but Sarah knew it was pointless. This wasn't just a soldier. It was something far more dangerous. "I am the Guardian," the figure said in a voice that was both human and alien. "You are not meant to disturb this place. Leave now, or you will never leave at all." Sarah's heart raced. The Guardian wasn't just a soldier. It was the key to the weapon. This was the last line of defense, the final barrier between them and the weapon that could save humanity. "We're not leaving," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "We came here for the weapon, and we'll fight for it." The Guardian's eyes flickered with an almost human-like expression. It raised its hand, and a pulse of energy shot out from its palm, sending a shockwave through the air. Sarah's team was thrown back, their bodies slamming into the ground as the power of the pulse overwhelmed them. Sarah fought to stay conscious, her vision blurred, but she could still see the Guardian standing tall, its presence like an immovable mountain. She knew they couldn't beat it with guns. They needed to outsmart it, to find a way to use the energy of the ancient city against it. She struggled to her feet, her mind racing. The symbols on the pillar, they were a key. If she could unlock them, maybe they could use the weapon to fight back. "Mark," she shouted, "the symbols. We need to activate them." Mark, who had just regained his footing, nodded and ran toward the pillar. Sarah followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The Guardian was coming closer, its steps heavy and deliberate. They didn't have much time. Mark reached the pillar and began to press the symbols in a sequence that seemed to match the ancient map. As he did, the symbols on the stone glowed brighter, the energy around them intensifying. The Guardian let out a loud, piercing scream, as if it felt the power slipping from its control. "No," it roared, "you cannot control it." But Sarah and Mark were determined. With one final press of the last symbol, the entire pillar erupted with light, blinding and powerful. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then the ground shook violently, and the Guardian collapsed to the ground, its form crumbling into dust. The light from the pillar began to fade, but the power remained. Sarah and her team stood in the center of the ancient square, breathing heavily, their bodies aching from the battle. They had done it. They had activated the weapon. The energy of humanity had been unleashed, and it had defeated the Guardian. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The invaders were still out there, and now that the weapon had been awakened, they would stop at nothing to claim it. "Let's move," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We have what we came for. Now we fight." The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity's fury had just been unleashed, and the invaders would feel its power. This part sets the stage for a climactic confrontation, with the team unlocking the weapon and defeating a powerful Guardian. Would you like me to proceed with Part 5 or adjust any details? As the scavengers quickly disappeared into the shadows, Sarah turned to her team, her mind in overdrive. The enemy wasn't just some alien race from another world. It was humanity itself, or at least a twisted version of it. They had a lot more to figure out. But for now, the only thing Sarah knew for sure was this: Earth's survival depended on uncovering the truth behind these mysterious attackers, and if she was right, humanity was facing a far greater threat than anyone could have ever imagined. This part introduces the shocking revelation about the attackers, raising the stakes for Sarah and her team. Would you like me to continue or modify any part of the story? The light from the ancient pillar still flickered as Major Sarah Carter and her team caught their breath. The Guardian, an imposing figure of metal and energy, was gone, reduced to dust. But despite their victory, the team knew their battle wasn't over. The invaders would not stop now. They had awakened something ancient, something powerful, and the enemy would stop at nothing to control it. Sarah stood tall, her mind racing. They had unlocked the weapon, but what exactly had they unleashed? The energy in the air still crackled, almost alive, but they couldn't afford to waste time questioning it. The invaders were already closing in on their position. "Everyone, stay alert," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over." Mark Reynolds, still recovering from the shockwave, nodded. "We need to get back to the base. We have to warn the rest of the survivors. If the invaders realize what we've done, we won't give them the chance." Sarah interrupted. "We're not running. We fight now, while we have the weapon." The team set out from the ruins of the ancient city, moving swiftly but cautiously. Every step they took was filled with urgency. The power of the weapon pulsed through Sarah's veins, and she could feel its energy, like a fire waiting to be unleashed. But she knew they had to use it wisely. The weapon wasn't just about destruction, it was about the survival of humanity. It could either save them or wipe them all out. As they approached the coast, they saw the first signs of the invaders, ships in the sky, dark and menacing. The enemy had arrived. "Get down," Sarah ordered, pulling her team into cover. They crouched behind the remains of a broken building, watching as the invader ships landed in the distance, their massive forms casting long shadows on the earth. There were dozens of them, and as Sarah looked at the ships, she realized something terrifying. They weren't just attacking with weapons. They had come to claim the weapon for themselves. "They'll never stop," Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration. "They won't rest until they control it." Mark clenched his fists. "Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance." With the invaders close, Sarah knew the time had come to act. They couldn't run. The world was depending on them. She looked at her team, each of them determined, despite the fear that still hung in the air. "Here's the plan," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong. "We split up. Mark, you and Lieutenant Thompson take the high ground. You'll have the best chance to cover us from above. Sergeant Diaz, you're with me. We'll use the weapon's power to hold them off as long as we can." "We're ready, Major," Mark said, his voice full of determination. With a final nod, Sarah led her team out into the open. The invaders hadn't seen them yet, but it wouldn't be long before they did. The weapon was still pulsating with energy, and as Sarah moved forward, she could feel it responding to her thoughts, to her will. It was as if the weapon recognized humanity's desperation, its need to survive. The invaders' ships began to move, their soldiers marching toward the ruins. But as they stepped forward, the ground beneath them trembled, and a wave of energy shot from the pillar, sweeping through the air like a tidal wave. The invaders were thrown back, their armor rattling and their weapons scattered. For a moment, it seemed like the weapon was enough to stop them, but the invaders quickly regrouped, their eyes burning with rage. They weren't going to give up without a fight. Sarah felt the heat of battle rising as she raised her hand, directing the power of the weapon. The energy surged from her, like an unstoppable force, crashing into the enemy lines. The invaders were forced back again, but this time, they fought with greater intensity. Their weapons fired with deadly precision, and Sarah could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her. "Mark, now," Sarah shouted. From the high ground, Mark and Thompson opened fire, their shots picking off invader soldiers from a distance. The enemy soldiers, caught between the ground assault and the fire from above, began to scatter. But Sarah knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The invaders were relentless, and the weapon's power was fading. Every blast took its toll, and Sarah felt herself growing weaker as she poured everything she had into the weapon. "We need to push them back for good," Sarah shouted to her team. Sergeant Diaz, who had been by Sarah's side, looked at her with grim determination. "We'll hold them off as long as we can, Major. We're not giving up." Together, they fought back, each move calculated, each shot fired with purpose. The invaders were falling, but more were coming. Sarah knew they needed something more, something to end this once and for all. That's when she saw it. A massive ship, larger than the others, hovering above the battlefield. It was the invaders' command ship, and Sarah knew if they took it down, they would take down the whole invasion. "Mark," she shouted, "focus your fire on that ship. We need to take it down now." Mark didn't hesitate. He aimed carefully, and with a few precise shots, the ship's defenses began to weaken. The invaders on the ground turned their attention to the command ship, but it was too late. The ship exploded in a burst of light, sending shockwaves through the air. The invaders' forces began to falter. Without their command ship, they were disorganized, struggling to regroup. Sarah could see the panic in their eyes. They knew they had lost their advantage. "This is it," Sarah yelled. "We push forward." With the invaders in disarray, the team advanced. They pushed forward with everything they had, the weapon's energy surging through them, guiding their every move. The invaders had underestimated humanity's will to fight, and now they were paying the price. As the last of the invaders fell, Sarah stood in the center of the battlefield, her heart pounding. The weapon was silent now, its power fading, but humanity had won. They had fought back, against all odds, and they had saved the world. Exhausted, Sarah looked around at her team. They had done it. They had turned the tide. The invaders were gone, and Earth was free. But Sarah knew that their victory wasn't just about defeating the invaders. It was about humanity's resilience. No matter the odds, no matter the challenges, they had fought for their future. And in the end, it was humanity's fury, their will to survive, that had made all the difference. "We did it," Mark said, his voice filled with awe and relief. Sarah nodded, a tired but proud smile crossing her face. "We did, and we'll keep fighting. For humanity, for Earth." The battle was over, but the war for the future had only just begun. But one thing was clear: humanity would never give up. Not as long as they had the strength to fight.